What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's Game Week 27 transfer tips, and we're going to jump straight into it by talking about Ivan Toney. Very popular this week. Over 200,000 FPL managers have already brought him in, and we all know why. He's got the double in 27, Everton away, Southampton away. There's the game in blank Game Week 28 against Leicester at home, and then it's a double Game Week in 29, Brighton away and Man United away, which is obviously a bit tougher than the one in 27. And we saw him last night back in the points against Fulham, took the penalty, got 2 bonus, finished on 8 points, also was man of the match and hit the woodwork, so it could have been more points on another day. And I think at this stage we can just all agree that Ivan Toney, when the fixtures are good, is a great FPL option. And Brentford, to be fair, just one of those teams that you always expect to find a way to score a goal. So even though the double in 29 is pretty tough, they could score in both of those games. And just overall, the next 3 game weeks having 5 fixtures just makes him a really good option. So once again, the only real thing to discuss is the possible yellow card suspension and the possible ban that could happen given the charges that have been brought against him. Now, ultimately, because of the case that's ongoing, we don't really have much information to go on. The last thing that I saw said nothing is probably going to happen until April. How concrete that is, I do not know. We've seen Thomas Frank and Ivan Toney either mention in interviews or via kind of Instagram posts and stuff like that you shouldn't believe everything you see in the media, etc. So that could be completely false, but that's the last thing we saw. The other thing that same journalist said was that Brentford would want this to happen sooner rather than later, so that some of the ban, if that's what happens, is covered by the summer months when they don't have competitive games. So I can't tell you exactly when anything is going to happen. It could be next week for all I know, but the last thing we saw was April. Now, if we ignore the yellow card suspension for a second, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's just talk about the possible ban. If it is sometime in April, Game Week 27 is the 11th and 15th of March, Game Week 28 is the 18th of March, and then there's an international break. So the 2 fixtures for Game Week 29 are the 1st and 5th of April, and I just think there's so much upside of having 5 fixtures in 3 game weeks for a penalty taker who also has pretty good open play goal threat as well. It's just too good to turn down. If you have to deal with him because of the yellow card suspension or because of any ban after that, then you just do it. There's quite a few other forwards, at least right now, that might change in the future, that we could go to instead. Now, as someone that wildcarded him in Game Week 26, I did see a comment on a video yesterday that I didn't get back to, which said, if nothing has happened by Game Week 30, will you still get rid of him? Because I do have a rough plan to change Toney back to Haaland. We'll see whether that happens, right? There's no point in worrying about it right now. I think you just play it by ear and you just see what needs to be done. So let's say for my own team, if we get to this Game Week 30 and Kane is injured or something, right, and I've still got Toney and there's no word about a ban or anything like that, then I would just remove Kane instead and I would just play it game week to game week with Toney and eventually probably just get rid of him anyway because there's no more doubles or anything like that for Brentford. So I feel like if you're going to bring him in, the time is right now. There's no point in delaying it further. If you miss this double game week, then with a potential suspension and ban hanging over his head, and then a tougher double in 29, I just don't see why you would buy him at this point. So if you're going to get him, it has to be, in my opinion, right now. The more you delay it, the more worried you're going to be. Let's quickly talk about the yellow card suspension. So he has to avoid getting to 10 yellow cards, otherwise he'll face a 2-match suspension. So if he got the 2 yellow cards against Everton and Southampton, he would miss Leicester. If he got 1 in these 2 games and then 1 against Leicester, he'd miss the first game of double game week 29. Again, in different circumstances where Toney's only got single game weeks every week for the next 3 weeks, maybe you wouldn't take that risk. But he's got double game weeks, and if he does avoid those 2 yellows, then there's potentially a lot of points there. So again, I just think he's worth the risk. And while I do think there's quite a few forward options people are thinking about, one is Haaland, who's going to blank in 28 and doesn't double in 29. A lot of people already own Kane. Watkins is another good option. He has a double in 29. So he only has 1 less fixture than Ivan Toney. So you could go to him for safety. Iheanacho, but I'm always worried about the minutes. So while it does feel like there are other players you can consider, I don't think many of them are as good as Ivan Toney is this week. And I think he's even a captain option. I'm not going to get into that right now because I think I probably will end up switching to Mitoma instead. But although it's 2 away games, Everton and Southampton are both pretty poor defences. So I like what Toney can potentially do against them. So I think, yeah, I still think he's a good option to buy. I think the one thing I would do is not make any early transfers with him. Just wait until the last minute, or as last minute as you can, because we might get news at the end of the week, which obviously then changes your thoughts completely. So yeah, great option. There is obviously risk with bringing him in, but I think it's worth it. So Sánchez for Brighton hasn't been massively transferred out yet. There are going to be a lot of people that own him that are wondering what to do. So we'll talk about specific replacements in a minute. I guess first of all, we should discuss whether or not this was just a one-game thing, or whether he has just lost his place moving forwards. So I took these quotes from Fantasy Football Scout, who got them from Twitter, and it was De Zerbi talking about his decision to play Jason Steele over Robert Sánchez against West Ham in game week 26. So he said, in the last period I have seen Jason and I decided to play him, but there isn't any problem with Robert. I spoke with him yesterday morning before training. I like Robert and I like Jason. At this moment I think Jason can play better and can be more important for us, but in the future I don't know what will be my decision. Then a different quote from a different journalist: Jason now is playing better than Robert. He is closer than Robert to my style. Now interestingly, I should have looked this up to make sure I've got all the facts and names right, but I think the same thing happened with Sánchez before, but where he became the new number one. So I believe it was under Graham Potter, and Matt Ryan was the previous number one, and a few games into the season Ryan got dropped and Sánchez became the new number one and he's kept his place up until this point. Obviously the difference now is he's the one that's been dropped. Now reading these quotes, this tells me that Jason Steele is the new number one and he should play both games in double game week 27. As long as he keeps playing well, then he should keep that spot moving forward. Does that mean there's no risk with bringing him in? Absolutely not, because from this, we know that De Zerbi is happy to change his goalkeeper midway through the season. I don't think we're going to see a situation where Steele plays a couple of games, then Sánchez plays a couple of games, right? Steele probably will get a run now, but there is some risk there. How much risk you want to apply to this situation, obviously you can decide, but there is some risk, right? The other thing is the bit at the bottom of the first quote, but in the future I don't know what will be my decision. The only thing I would say about that is, what else was he going to say? He's not going to say Jason Steele is the new number one, Robert Sánchez is dropped, he's done, because he wants to keep both goalkeepers happy. He wants Sánchez to think there's a way back into this team. So I think Jason Steele, originally, I wasn't sure whether or not he was a good replacement, but now I think he could be in certain situations. But it's really going to depend on how risky you think the move is, and also what chips you're playing and when and stuff like that. So if we come over to the FPL page and find Steele here, I think he's going to play both games in 27, and there will be some of you out there that decided to bench boost in 27, and if you wildcarded in 26, you probably went for Raya and Sánchez. In that case, you could just swap Sánchez to Steele, bench boost him in 27, hope that he plays both games, also save yourself 0.7 million because he's only 3.9, so you've then got that for future transfers, and hope for the best. Worst case after 27 is Sánchez comes back in, and you have to play your other goalkeeper every single week. The only issue I see is, because there is some risk there, Brighton have 2 to 3 more double game weeks after 29. So if you've got Steele and he doesn't keep his place, then you've got one less Brighton spot than everyone else has, right? Or you've got to use transfers to either bring Sánchez back in. Nobody wants to be switching goalkeepers that much, or using 2 transfers to just get rid of that Brighton spot in goal and move it to a defender or an attacker instead. So they are really the risks, right? That he doesn't keep his place, and then you've got to deal with that later. You could just decide, well, if he does lose his place, I'll have a 3.9 million goalkeeper on the bench. I'll always play my other goalkeeper, and I'll go into the Brighton double game weeks with 2 players. That's also a perfectly viable strategy. It really depends what you want to do. Otherwise, if you just don't want to go for the Brighton goalkeepers and you want to look elsewhere, then we know Raya, as we've just spoken about with Toney, double game week this week, plays in 28, double in 29, Newcastle Wolves after that, and Villa in 32, so they also don't blank then. The fixtures after that get much tougher. Chelsea away, Liverpool away, Spurs away, and Man City to end the season. So preferably at this point you'd want a different goalkeeper, but up until game week 32, Raya is pretty good. Another one that I like is David De Gea, even though Man United have just got smashed by Liverpool, because if you can get through game week 28, he's got a decent single game week fixture this week, a decent double game week of Newcastle away, Brentford at home, and the fixtures after that are pretty good, right? Everton and Nottingham Forest. Obviously, Chelsea at home in 32, that could be off if Man United beat Fulham in the FA Cup, so you need to factor in what chips you're going to play, what other goalkeeper you have right now. If you've got Raya, then he will play that week anyway. But Man United are likely to have 2 more double game weeks if they beat Fulham, which will be in 34 and 37. And the fixtures outside of that are pretty good. So I also like David De Gea. I don't know if there's too many other goalkeepers I would consider. I suppose you could look at, I'm trying to see the screen here, someone like Nick Pope, because decent fixture this week, also plays in game week 28. So a lot of that, whether you need that player in 28, will depend on which other goalkeeper you've got, of course. Double in 29. Rest of the fixtures for the season are pretty good. They've still got to play Arsenal and Spurs at home and Chelsea away last day. But they also have another fixture to rearrange against Brighton. So Newcastle will get another double game week after 29. So I think that Steele, De Gea, Raya, and Pope are probably the 4 main goalkeepers that I would pick. But let me know down in the comments below if there's anyone I've missed. Obviously, Alisson and Ederson, I just don't think they're worth going for. They're just quite expensive. There's no more... there's no double game weeks on the horizon for Liverpool and Man City. They will have one later on, but I think I would prefer to go for Nick Pope, who plays in 28 instead. If you don't need someone for 28, you could look at Ederson and Alisson, but that's not where I would be using Man City and Liverpool spots right now. You wouldn't want Leno or anyone like that. Danny Ward plays in 28, very cheap, and also doubles in 29, but I don't think it's a good time to be buying. So they are the ones I would look at. Like I said, when I first started thinking about this, I didn't like the Sánchez to Steele swap, but I think it could work now. And if you've not wildcarded yet and you just want a short-term solution, then go for Steele. Hope he plays both games in 27, keeps his place. If not, you're going to wildcard later anyway. So let's stick with Brighton and talk about the attackers. The most transferred in this week is Mitoma, with nearly 300,000 FPL managers bringing him in. What I find interesting about that is he scored 13 points in game week 26. McAllister actually scored 14. And for the season, they're on the same amount of points. But McAllister's only been brought in by just over 100,000. I guess Mitoma is just a little bit more exciting to watch. And recent returns have also been better as well. I just thought the gap in transfers in was quite interesting because McAllister's a good option too. Now, obviously, for Brighton, they've got the 2 double game weeks in 27 and 29. So as long as you can manage game week 28, either because you've got enough other players that play or you're going to free hit a wild card, then Brighton options look great, especially the attackers. I think on paper, Leeds away and Crystal Palace at home, Brentford at home and Bournemouth away, they look great for attack and return. So I think doubling up is decent. You could look at someone like Evan Ferguson as well. He seems to be getting pretty good minutes, but I just think at this point in time in FPL, there's a lot of forwards that people can find to fill those 3 spots. I think you're better off having 1 or 2 midfielders from Brighton instead. Now, for my own team, I picked last week Mitoma and March, and I played Mitoma. Now, part of the reason was because March had a little injury, so I didn't want to risk it, even though there wasn't really much risk of him not starting. But also, I have basically designated Mitoma as my number 1 Brighton midfielder going forward. So obviously in game weeks like 27 where they've got double game weeks, I'm going to play them both. But after that, where there's only single game weeks, and obviously I've got a squad of I can't find my cursor. I've got a squad of 8 attackers, right? I've got the 4 midfielders, 3 forwards, and then Odegaard on the bench. I'm going to have to bench one of them every week. So when the fixtures get a bit tougher for Brighton, Spurs away, Chelsea away, Man City at home, the one that I will play is Mitoma, and I didn't get McAllister last week, and I guess I haven't really changed my mind that much in that I think Mitoma is the best option. Between March and McAllister, I think it's quite close. Obviously, McAllister got the recent returns and he is on penalties absolutely nailed. And if he keeps playing in a more advanced role, there is every reason to think that he could score more points than March over the next few weeks. The reason that I went for March is, one, he's a little bit cheaper, but also I just think if Brighton don't get penalties, I feel like in any given game, Mitoma and March can outscore McAllister. And also there's a chance at some point that he gets moved a bit deeper, either from the start of games or during games as well. And then his open play threat in terms of goals and assists does go down a bit. I think you could absolutely make a case just to pick him though. So the order for me would almost be Mitoma first, so then it makes sense he's nearly 300,000 transfers in. And then you could almost, in my opinion, you can almost say that March and McAllister are equal. Do you want to back the penalties and the hope that he plays further forward? Or do you want to back the guy that is basically, at least in the starting lineup, playing in the same position as Mitoma? I decided to take the slightly cheaper price and go for March, but McAllister is great as well. I don't really have a much stronger opinion than that. I think you go for whatever your gut is, right? And if you think March or McAllister is better than Mitoma, that's absolutely fine as well. But I think nearly 300,000 FPL managers this week have got a great player. He's going to play both of those games. The minutes look great going forwards, and I'm sure those numbers are going to be even higher. I just don't really have a bad thing to say about him. Expected goals, 0.24 per 90, 0.23 expected assists. That's very good for a player that only costs 5.4. He could be in our teams for the rest of the season because Brighton have 2 to 3 more doubles after 29. And although the fixtures from 30 to 32 are poor, you can always bench one of them anyway. So Mitoma looks great. After that, March or McAllister, I'm not really sure. I went for March. Lots of you will go for McAllister. Let me know down below, what are your order of the 3 Brighton midfielders in terms of importance? All right, let's talk about Fabian Schär. And basically what I would say is don't be too hasty about selling him before you hear more from Eddie Howe, because I think that Newcastle defenders for the next 3 game weeks are looking pretty good. In game week 27, it's a home game against Wolves, who don't score a huge amount of goals. And also, it's just difficult to go to St James's Park as well. In 28, it's Nottingham Forest away. Now, to be fair, it's up for discussion about whether or not that should be a green fixture. But I wouldn't put it past Newcastle going there and getting a clean sheet. And then they've got the double in game week 29. So if Eddie Howe says he's fit and available, I think he's a pretty good hold. Now, a lot of that will depend on what chips you're playing. You might want a wild card and go for cheaper defenders that are mostly going to sit on your bench. That's what I did. I went for Botman instead. But if you are someone that's not looking to use chips over the next few weeks, the fact that they have a pretty good fixture in blank game week 28 makes him a pretty easy hold. Obviously, if Eddie Howe says he's not going to be available, if there is a bit of doubt there, then you could sell him to someone else. But the reason I like the idea of holding him is because of that goal threat. 0.14 expected goals per 90 for a defender is very good. Obviously, as a centre-back, you are heavily reliant on your team getting corners and free kicks and stuff like that. But when they do get them, he is very much one of their biggest threats from those set pieces, right? 0.05 expected assists is what it is, but that goal threat as a centre-back is pretty decent. You're looking at similar levels to someone like Gabriel, who you know that I like for Arsenal. So I think obviously Trippier is the main player to go for from Newcastle if you want a defender. But if you're looking for a second one and you've got the budget to spend, Schär is probably the better pick. I will say, I've kind of already said it, I have Botman, but the reason for that is he's going to sit on my bench most weeks, and I'm just going to hope that I get through game week 29 where he can just match Schär and Schär doesn't get an attack and return, because in the future he's only 4.5 million and he's mostly going to sit on my bench anyway. But if you're not playing chips or you've got the budget or you want to go for that more attacking threat, I think Schär is a really good option. So let me know down in the comments below what you were doing with him, what you think about all the players I've talked about. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be back tomorrow with my team selection video.